5 Kansas City Chief fans were together to watch a football game on TV and celebrate a huge win when tragedy struck. 3 of the 5 friends would not live through the night. Their deaths remain a huge mystery. The narrative told by the surviving friends seemed to change like quicksand. And yet the police have reported these deaths are not being investigated as a homicide. My question is, why? I'm Amy from A Life Without Parole. I've done a deep dive and put all the pieces of this puzzle together, and as I've done that, I ended up with more questions than answers. I've narrowed those questions down to my top 10 unanswered questions. Before I get to the unanswered questions I have, let me tell you what we do know. 3 men were found dead in the backyard of Jordan Willis's rented home in Missouri 2 days after they went there to watch the Chiefs play the Chargers on January 7th. A spokesperson for the police station said, and I quote, "They are still waiting on the medical examiner's office to determine a cause of death for those 3 gentlemen." The agency stressed this case has not been ruled a homicide or suspicious deaths because there were no obvious signs of foul play. The medical examiner's office said the process takes 6 to 8 weeks. They said it's important to note that the 6-week estimate is the minimum amount of time to complete their work. They also said all cases aren't the same. Depending on the complexity, this could take longer than 8 weeks. End of quote. Even though we don't have the records from the medical examiner and the police say there was no apparent sign of foul play, it seems crazy to say there was no sign of foul play when the details that have been made public do exactly the opposite. 3 men died without foul play being a factor, especially to claim that before toxicology has even come back, seems very curious. But that's not the only curious thing. Common sense has people from around the world crying out with disgust at the absurdity of that statement. Not to mention the family members who dispute this. They are speaking out to say that things just aren't adding up. The deaths of Clayton McGeeney, 36, David Harrington, 37, and Ricky Johnson, 38. These 3 men have been friends since high school. Their deaths have shocked the community. It's normal to want to know the details of a loved one's death, but when the facts don't seem to add up, outrage ensues. The family members and community demand answers to the stories that are ever changing. The victims were last seen alive on the night of January 7th. 5 men got together at Jordan's home to watch the Kansas City Chiefs play the Las Vegas Raiders. I'm personally a die-hard football fan, so I get it. Jordan's attorney originally said Jordan had opened the front door and watched his 4 friends leave his home before he went to sleep on the couch for 2 days.
Yeah, can I back up for a moment there? Are you saying that your client, Jordan Willis, escorted the 3 victims to the door? He showed them to the door. Did they walk out the door?
It's not that formal, Ashley. He didn't escort them. They're his friends. Okay. They've been together all day. They're leaving the house. You know, they're guys. They shake hands. They hug. See you later, bro. Whatever they did. But he left them as they were leaving the home. It's not unusual for him and his friends to spend time in each other's homes. It's not unusual for them to hang out when the other person isn't there even. And in this case, he was there. So for whatever reason, they either came back in the home or they went directly to the backyard. That part, no one knows the answer to. Jordan believes they came back in the house and hung out for a while and continued to play video games. And at some point, they went outside in the backyard.
But to be clear, those three men left the house. Jordan saw them leave the house.
He said goodbye to them. He laid down and he crashed, and they went out the front door. Yes.
A fifth person who was at the house has a different story. He says he left around midnight, and all four of their friends were still awake and watching Jeopardy on TV. It's interesting that the accounts are different. One of these two men is clearly lying. The question is, which one? After the three men didn't return home, many family and friends were searching and calling. Clayton's fiance was so worried, she went to the house Tuesday morning, pounding on the door. Others had also gone to the house and pounded on the door because no one had heard from the men. You might be wondering why all the family and friends were coming to this house. And the answer is the fiance had a find friends on her fiance, and she knew that his phone was pinging in this home. Not to mention, two of the cars were parked out front. Now, realizing people kept coming over and pounding on the door and trying to contact the homeowner, but to no avail. Here is a quote from the fiance that she tried the doors, tried the gate, and eventually just her phone was saying that Clayton was there. He was pinging off his phone. So she knew something was up. What's interesting, at one point there is the comment from his attorney saying that he slept for 2 full days, and yet he didn't sleep the whole time. Listen to this part.
Did your client ever leave the home from Sunday night and the football game until Tuesday when they discovered the bodies in his backyard? Did he ever leave and go outside the home?
No, I don't believe that he did. He's self-employed. He works out of his home. He stayed in the home the entire time from, the basic scenario is they had watched the Chiefs game at a couple of different places. They went back to his place, his home afterwards, to play some video games and hang out. And at some point during that process, he got tired and he fell asleep. Before he fell asleep, they were going to leave. He actually escorted them to the door, said their goodbyes, opened the door. He went back on the couch and he crashed. And then when he woke up, they were gone. And during the day and a half that occurred, 2 days, I guess, because the police came in around 10 o'clock on Tuesday to his house, he was doing the things that he normally does inside of his home. And that he was sleeping, he was eating, and he was working.
Can I back up?
Okay, so his attorney said he was sleeping, he was eating, and he was working and doing normal things that he does in his home. Once again, this is different than the original statement given by his attorney, which is that he claimed he was asleep for the 2 days between the party and when his friends' bodies were found. So which is it? Was he asleep for 2 days, or was he eating and working and doing normal things? Let's hear it one more time.
On Tuesday to his house, he was doing the things that he normally does inside of his home. And that he was sleeping, he was eating, and he was working.
Can I back up?
As they were there pounding on the door, there was no answer. And yet, 2 of the men's cars were parked out on the street. We'll get to that in a minute. The homeowner was not answering text messages or calls, according to the fiance. 2 of the men's cars parked in the street were clearly something had to have gone on. Where are they? They're missing. The last known place was at Jordan's home, and their cars are still there. Now, if that was you, if you were the fiance, wouldn't you think, oh, something bad has happened inside that home? I think any of us would. Especially when the homeowner himself isn't answering any calls or texts. The phone calls, text messages, Facebook messages, all of that is another part of this story that has a lot of discrepancies, and the stories have changed. Originally, It was, oh, he never looked at his phone. Then it was, well, there might have been calls and texts coming to him, but because he didn't look at them, he's saying he didn't receive them until after the police arrived. But originally, all he said that he saw after the police arrived was the Facebook messages. Didn't bother to say anything about the calls and texts. Again, if you're home and you're eating and working and doing regular things, why wouldn't you be getting those calls and texts?
I would like to address the phone calls and the text messages if I could, since the reporter left that hanging out there.
Go ahead, because the initial suggestion was he only got a Facebook message and nobody was really trying to get him. Malik says that's not true because the fifth friend says that he was getting messages and he was trying to find him and he wasn't getting his messages answered either. So what is it?
Over and over again, the narrative changes according to the evidence that there is. The evidence showed that there were texts and calls coming in, so now the attorney has to switch gears and not just talk about the Facebook message, but now he's got another reason for his story to change based on the evidence.
So I have sent your staff the records, his phone records, which I acquired this afternoon, and also the text message records. And during that period of time, the phone calls that came in on the early morning hour after the game on the 7th and the early morning hours of the 8th, all the way to the 8th, and then all the way to the 9th when the police came, the only calls that came in were one from his dad, which we recognize the number, and you have the actual numbers. Mm-hmm. And then the other calls, there were 8 of them that came in from what is a dummy number. He has a robo-killer app on his phone. And so when calls come in that are unrecognized or for whatever reason, they read as this dummy number. I've dialed this dummy number myself. It's a non-existent number. You get a message saying whatever. It's a dummy number. And then the only other call that came in was all zeros, a call that he blocked again from a robocop.
What about
the text messages?
Yeah.
Robotech. Yeah. As far as the text messages go, what you have, there are a series of incoming text messages. That's all we have. There are no outgoing text messages. So the corollary to that, what goes along with what makes sense to that is when you and I get a text message, typically we're going to respond. If somebody texts you and says, hey, these 3 guys are missing, and they're your friend, you're going to respond. If Alex had said, if someone had said to him, the text message came in, why don't you respond? You would respond to your friend, right? That's what you would do.
Maybe.
The reporter wanted to twist my words when I said he didn't receive any messages. And technically I'm right. His phone received the messages. If you don't look at it, you did not receive the messages. I guess I should have said he didn't read the messages. And yes, as far as the text message from his friend, he did not tell me about that. And when I was informed of that, I asked him about that. And then he told me that's right. So there's 2 text messages, or excuse me, a Facebook message and a text message. And neither one he got before the police arrived at his home.
Once again, then why comment about the Facebook message as being the only message instead of the text message as well?
Yeah, we have
him. His dad called at noon and he picked up. He didn't pick up any in the morning. He didn't pick up any in the evening when he would have been sleeping. There were no other phone calls. And the text messages, the same way, there's no outgoing text messages those 2 days.
Right.
Did you catch the part where he said that he picked up a phone call from his dad at noon? So again, contradicts the narrative that he slept for 48 hours.
Which, as you know, who can stay off their phone for 2 days straight unless you're principally sleeping it out of it and you don't have your phone around you? So everything is consistent with what he's saying.
Sleeping and out of it, and yet takes a call from his own dad, who, by the way, is defending his son. Let's go ahead and read the quote that the attorney sent on behalf of his client. Prior to being contacted by police, he did not receive any phone calls or text messages from friends or family members of the deceased. 2 people came to his house, however, he did not hear them as he sleeps with earbuds and a loud fan. One of those people, the wife of one of the deceased, tried to reach him via Facebook Messenger. Unfortunately, he did not see this message until after the police. One message, not a text message. Interesting. Another discrepancy has to do with that 5th friend who was there the night of the party.
Another friend, a 5th person, was still there after his client had gone to sleep, But the other friend telling our News Nation affiliate in an exclusive interview that he wasn't the last person to see the three men alive. And when he left, the tenant, Jordan Willis, was still awake.
Do they get tired? They're people who are very close to you, and then you feel comfortable going to bed and allowing them to leave whenever they want to leave.
My brain is bouncing all over the place just listening to this attorney talk about how he escorted his friends out the door, but then also he lets them leave when they want to leave after he goes to bed, and then maybe they came back in after he was in bed. I mean, this is going all in all directions to try to cover the evidence, in my opinion. Clayton's fiance got so desperate after no one would answer the door that she broke a window and entered the home, announcing herself and trying to find someone. She apparently saw one of the men on the back porch, so she exited the premises and called the police to do a welfare check. This was 2 days after they went missing. The police came to the house and knocked on the door. I have a feeling they had a powerful knock. Jordan answered the door for the police. He was in his boxer shorts drinking water from a wine glass that had wine previously in it. He said he'd been asleep with noise-canceling headphones and also had a fan that would drown out noise. He proceeded to tell the police that he'd been asleep for 2 days. This is a curious thing to me. If you've been asleep for 2 days, how do you know it's been 2 days? I mean, we don't know all the details. Maybe the police said, it's Tuesday, your buddy's been missing since Sunday, and he said, oh, the last thing I don't know. I don't know the details of that. 2 of the men's bodies were discovered in the backyard, and one was on the back porch of the residence. Law enforcement has not officially confirmed the men's cause of death, but it is suspected that they died of hypothermia since Kansas City has below freezing temperatures on these days. An attorney for the homeowner, Jordan, the person who was renting the home where the bodies were found, has released many statements and done many interviews. His version of what happened, according to his client, has changed a few times. In one statement, he claims his client was not aware his friends were dead behind his home until police showed up at his door on January 9th. The Kansas City Police Department said that the victims' deaths are not being investigated as homicides and that the homeowner is not a suspect. Put a pin in that. We'll come back to it in just a minute. Now that it has been 2 weeks since the tragedy, the mystery surrounding it has deepened as it recently emerged there was a 5th person present at the home when McGeeney, Harrington, and Johnson visited their friend. One of the ever-changing pieces to this story is Mr. Jordan Willis, reportedly went to bed while his friends were still at the home. This version has changed over time, but it does seem a bit weird. If your friends are over and you're going to strip down to your boxer shorts, put on noise-canceling headphones, and a loud fan to drown out the noise while laying on the sofa, where would the friends then sit? Maybe he has a lot of sofas. Maybe he's putting this on so he can sleep while his friends are right there making noise. I don't know, but it seems a little weird. A neighbor was interviewed and said the street was a very quiet street. So why would you need noise-canceling headphones, again, unless you're trying to sleep through the Jeopardy TV show? But in one version, he actually left the room while they were all still watching the show. And if he did leave the room, all of those things make sense. But when the police arrived, he claims he was sleeping all the time on his couch. So see how that just doesn't quite makes it curious. It doesn't mean it's for sure, but it is curious, but there's more. I mean, it makes more sense that if you're drunk or drugged, which we're going to talk about that in a minute, that you would crash out on the couch, falling asleep without all those other bedtime preparation things. Although a cause and manner of death have not been confirmed pending an autopsy, John Picerno, an attorney for Mr. Jordan Willis, said the men seemingly died by hypothermia. Mr. Picerno said it was a mystery how these three bodies went undiscovered for 2 days. Jordan had absolutely nothing to do with their deaths. I'm quoting. He does not know the timing or manner of their deaths, nor does he know how or when they exited his house. He had no knowledge that they remained in his backyard or that they needed medical attention. Mr. Willis was unaware that loved ones had been trying to locate his three missing friends. Although 2 cars that belonged to his friends were parked in the street, Mr. Willis didn't notice the cars because they were not parked in his driveway. End of quote. This is interesting because when you see the house, you realize that cars parked in the driveway would make it harder for him to see than if they were parked in the street. And if he's been asleep for 2 days, he's obviously not backed out his car, so he would not ever have looked in his driveway, according to his own account. So it's a little bit conflicting there. It does make sense that there's a possibility that all the men were on drugs. Is it possible that 3 of the men went outside perhaps to smoke, and because of alcohol or drugs didn't feel the cold temperatures, went to sleep, then died of exposure? I mean, it's one thing for a person to tragically end up in a snowdrift after leaving a bar, but it's a completely different story for 3 people to end up dead sitting on somebody's back porch after a party. That is according to Dr. Caleb Alexander with Johns Hopkins University. The fact that there's 3 individuals really heightens the curiosity and the tragedy of this case, and I think increases the likelihood that something more than moderate amounts of alcohol were at play here, he added. End of quote. Cruz, a family member of one of the victims, claims that Harrington didn't do drugs and was strong about not doing them. If that's true, is there a possibility that somehow drugs were slipped into these 3 men's drinks and they took those drugs without their knowledge? Family members of one of the victims is convinced that Jordan drugged the friends and then dragged them outside. This allegation doesn't really make sense to me. If in fact he intentionally drugged the men, dragged them outside to die, why wouldn't he try to hide their bodies or their vehicles? I mean, that doesn't add up. I personally believe there is a lot of missing pieces, but throwing out possibilities of who done it isn't the best answer either. I'm just trying to put all the questions and all the pieces that we know out there, and then we can try to figure out without pointing fingers where they shouldn't be pointed. Alexander, who specializes in drug use and safety, said the circumstances looked like the result of a dangerous combination of opioid-like drugs and alcohol, to which they could have either intentionally or unintentionally been exposed. To me, this question, intentional or unintentional, should be at the heart of this investigation. Is there drugs involved? And if so, were they intentionally or unintentionally taken? The Kansas City Police Department is investigating whether alcohol or drugs were involved in the incident. Mr. Willis had been cooperative with the investigation and was not considered a suspect. And in fact, authorities, as I said before, do not suspect foul play. I don't know. If he was asleep for 2 days, was he also drugged? I would love to hear more from person number 5. Okay, so another quote. First and foremost, this case is 100% not being investigated as a homicide. There have not been any arrests or charges, and no one is in custody. There is no specific threats nor concerns for the surrounding community at this time. Again, quote from the police department. Curious. But if there's no concern, why do the accounts of the two remaining Chiefs fans who were at the home the night of the tragedy have conflicting accounts of what happened that night? According to the fifth man, who has not been named publicly, he claimed he arrived at Mr. Willis's home before McGeeney, Harrington, and Johnson and left around midnight. The man's attorney, Andrew Talge, told News Nation that the other four men were alive and watching Jeopardy when he left. So which is it? Did man number 5 leave at midnight while the others all sat and watched TV? Or is Jordan's account the correct version of what happened that night, which he claims he escorted the four men to the front door and then went to sleep on the couch for 2 days? Mr. Talge said that his client had received messages from McGeeney's fiancée and Johnson's mother, who were concerned after not hearing from their loved ones. Despite Mr. Picerno's previous statement, Mr. Talge said his client did send a text to Mr. Willis asking if he knew McGeeney, Harrington, and Johnson's were missing. I mean, let's face it, all of the text messages and calls are provable facts. According to a brother of one of the victims, the police told the family they were still investigating all the phone data. Even still, the family members are clearly frustrated at the lack of answers in the investigation into their loved ones' deaths. Just the thought of him dying, then him sitting outside in the cold for 2 days, McGeeney's cousin Caleb told Fox 4, it's extremely devastating. The whole family is messed up. He was such a good person. I personally know that police don't disclose everything that they have on a case, but to say that they're not investigating the case as a homicide seems really weird to me. Either the police are doing a bait and switch job to the suspect, meaning they're trying to trick him into thinking he's safe so he doesn't know he's actually being investigated, or there could be another reason, which could include a cop cover-up, poor police work, or possibly even laziness. Or there's another possibility, and that is they're doing their due diligence, but hiding it from the public. And I guess there's even one more. Everyone in this is truly innocent. Hopefully, we will eventually have results and be able to answer some of these hard questions. But I want to give you my top 10 questions I still have regarding these mysterious deaths. So number 1, if the police are not investigating the deaths of these 3 men as a homicide, would they have let the deaths go without an autopsy? And speaking of autopsy, who ordered the autopsy? Was it the coroner or the investigators? If the police believe it's not a homicide, why would they order the autopsy? Just for your information, there are 7 states that do not require automatic autopsies. 21 states automatically require autopsies, and 23 states have a discretionary law when it comes to autopsies. The law in the state of Missouri is if on view of the dead body and after personal inquiry into the cause and manner of death, the coroner determines that a further examination is necessary in the public interest. The coroner, on the coroner's own authority, may make or cause to be made an autopsy on the body. So, who ordered the autopsies? I'd love to find that answer. Okay, question number 2. If 2 of the men were found dead in the yard and one on the porch, what were the conditions of the bodies when the police found them?
We know it was a cold night, but was there snow on the ground or was the ground bare? If there was snow on the ground, you can tell a lot about where they came in, where they exited. Did they come through the fence? Did they go through the back door? Did they topple over? Did it appear as if they toppled over, or were they just sitting down for a smoke and went to sleep? You can tell a lot if there's snow on the ground.
Number 3, Were there drugs on the scene? When Jordan's attorney is asked this question, he doesn't really answer it. In fact, he evades it. Is this the reason the police do not think there was foul play involved, but just a lot of alcohol or drugs that caused the men to not realize they were freezing? Number 4, what will the toxicology report reveal? Did the men die from an overdose caused by bad drugs, or did they die from exposure? Number 5, does it appear at least the man on the porch was trying to get back into the house?
Were there any curtains drawn so that you could actually see out into the backyard? We know that Jordan was getting food and whatnot. Could he have seen those bodies?
Number 6, if they were locked out of the house, why didn't they call for help? I can't believe that all 3 men were out for a smoke without their phones on them. Number 7, why didn't they just get into their cars and warm up? Number 8, why do the stories of what happened the night of the deaths keep changing? First, homeowner tells his attorney he saw the 4 men leave from the front door before he went to sleep. Then the story changes to he went upstairs to bed and left them watching Jeopardy. The timeline keeps changing too. In another account, he says he was asleep before they left. If he really did just go to bed, was he hungover for 2 days without noticing 2 of his friends' cars were still parked in front of his house? Number 9, if he was so hungover that he didn't notice his friends in the backyard and the cars in the front of the house, did he have enough wits about him to get, as I said before, did he have enough wits about him to get undressed, turn on his loud fan, put on his noise-canceling headphones? This alone is worth investigating further, just to verify all the changing stories. Jordan claims he didn't get any text messages from his friends' loved ones, but only Facebook messages that he didn't even see until after the police arrived. All these things are provable in an investigation, right down to whether or not Jeopardy is even on at midnight when the homeowner alleges he saw them watching as he went to bed. There's still so many questions that still need answered. This definitely is a case that is solvable. The biggest question I have has to do with that 5th friend. And if he collaborated all the same information that the homeowner claims, it doesn't make sense why their stories are different or keep changing. This is a very tragic case, even if it ends up being accidental overdose and then exposure. How is it that one man seems to have gone unscathed? That is, if it were to believe that the homeowner may have possibly also been knocked out on the drugs, but since he was in a warm environment, didn't die from exposure. My 10th question, did friend number 5 drive himself home after the night of partying with his friends? Okay, I said 10 questions, but I have a couple of bonus questions. Number 11, Ricky Johnson's brother, Jonathan Price, asked a great question. Were the dogs there? Apparently he had dogs. Where were they?
He has an excuse for that one as well. He says the dog was visiting his parents, dog or dogs.
Okay, then my last question. If Jordan intentionally slipped his buddy some drugs, then locked him out of the house in cold weather, why didn't he attempt to cover up the deaths? That doesn't really make sense. To me, there's so many questions that need answered. This case has so many curious parts. If no drugs were involved, this is even more curious. Could it be overindulging in alcohol? But even with that, there are a lot of missing pieces to this puzzle, or at the very least, puzzle pieces that don't appear to fit. I will keep following this case, and hopefully when toxicology reports come back, more answers will be coming, as well as what the police find out from checking on everyone's phones. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you again soon. See ya.